Safety Asia, if I might take a bit of time, works across the region and globally to bring together policymakers, diplomats, researchers, and industry to think through the governance and crisis implications of advanced AI systems, particularly from Asian and Global South perspectives. Today's session is part of a broader set of conversations we've been convening on what we're calling AI crisis diplomacy, how governments coordinate across borders when AI-related incidents unfold at speed and with uncertain attribution. So this discussion is intended to help continue that conversation and move us toward more concrete frameworks for AI crisis diplomacy and engagement across borders. So let me begin with a simple observation. In diplomacy, we are used to thinking in months and years. We negotiate, we deliberate, we build consensus. But AI-enabled crises do not move at diplomatic speed. Financial systems react in seconds, synthetic media spreads in minutes, autonomous systems can act before governments even know something has gone wrong. So the central question we are exploring today is how do governments coordinate diplomatically in response to AI-related crises that unfold across borders at machine speed? We circulated a short fire starter paper ahead of this session with our panelists, describing an AI crisis as one that crosses borders, unfolds faster than any single authority can manage, involves attribution uncertainty. These are not hypothetical challenges, and yet while we have built deeply interconnected technological systems, we have not yet built the corresponding cross-border crisis coordination infrastructure. This is what we want to explore together today, this morning. So if I might, before we move into my just presenting some scenarios, let me briefly introduce our speakers. We're joined this morning by Professor Stuart Russell, Director of the Center for Human Compatible AI at the University of California, Berkeley, and co-host of this session. Thank you, Professor Russell. Wan Si Lee, Director of the Infocom Media Development Authority, IMDA, of Singapore. Harayama Yuko, former Executive Director of the Global Partnership on AI and a leading voice in international AI governance from Japan. And Ajidan Azimi, apologies if I mispronounce, but founding chair of the Artificial Intelligence Council of the Republic of Tajikistan. We will also be hearing a short video intervention from Audrey Tang, the Cyber Ambassador of Taiwan and former digital minister. And we are delighted at some point, she might be in the room already, but she said she might be delayed, Ambassador Anne-Marie Engtoft Meldgaard, Denmark's tech ambassador, who may be joining us shortly, given her scheduling. So please join me in welcoming our speakers. Let me just quickly frame some scenarios, right? These are illustrative. They're simply to help us think concretely about coordination challenges with regard to AI. So scenario one, a financial crusade, a financial cascade, sorry. An AI-driven model misinterprets data and generates a false policy signal affecting another country's currency. Automated trading systems react instantly across jurisdictions. Markets halt, financial links strain, officials call each other. One side asks, why did you take this action? The other says, we didn't. Both may be telling the truth. The core problem is not only malfunction, it is the absence of a rapid cross-border verification channel to establish what happened before trust collapses. Here's another scenario, scenario two, deepfake-driven instability. A highly realistic synthetic video appears shortly before an election or peace negotiation. It spreads rapidly across platforms hosted in multiple jurisdictions. Verification takes longer than political timeline itself. By the time the video is debunked, the damage is already done. The issue here is not detection, it is the absence of a shared cross-border response mechanism at speed. Third scenario, autonomous infrastructure incident. An AI system managing interconnected infrastructure makes a decision that affects another country. The system may be hosted in one jurisdiction, operated in another, and affecting a third. Governments suddenly ask, who has authority? Who is responsible? And who do you call? Who can act, right? Our current diplomatic and legal frameworks assume human decision makers. They are not designed for agentic systems acting across borders. Across all three scenarios that I've outlined, the challenge is not only technological, it is coordination under uncertainty. So how do we establish shared reality quickly enough to prevent escalation? How do we clarify intent? How do we coordinate response? Now, to frame the broader implications, let me turn now to Professor Stuart Russell. Stuart, may I invite you to offer some reflections on why increasingly autonomous and agentic systems create new challenges for governance and diplomacy? Please.
Thank you very much for hosting the session and for the opportunity to speak. So AI has been around for about 80 years. I wrote my first AI program almost 50 years ago. And we've gone through a number of boom and bust cycles. So obviously we're in a boom, as one can see, right now. And that is the result of mainly large language model technology. And that technology is increasingly being augmented with so-called agentic capabilities, which is sort of ironic because my textbook, which came out in 1994, has on the front cover the Intelligent Agent book. And so the idea of an agent is central to how we think about AI systems. They're systems that perceive and act, and generally they will act in the pursuit of their objectives. So you asked about the challenges to governance from this fast-moving and technology and the fast unfolding scenarios. And in fact, this is one myth, I think, that is often trotted out by people who are opposed to regulation. They say, oh, you can't regulate something that is changing because by the time you've regulated, your regulation will be out of date. This is utter and complete nonsense. Think about how we regulate medicines. Medicines have to be shown to be safe and shown to be effective before they can be sold to the public. That regulation is going to remain in place for the next 500,000 years until we all become immortal and we don't have to take medicine at all. Right? It has nothing to do with the technology, it has to do with the risk. We set the level of risk that we're willing to accept from the technology, and we leave the technologists to figure out how to make the technology that satisfies that level of risk and delivers as much benefit as possible. And so, another permanent and future-proof form of regulation is liability. If you harm someone, you are legally responsible and you have to pay. That's going to be true for the next 500 billion years. And again, it has nothing to do with the technology. But unfortunately, pretty much all tech companies disclaim liability. So if you ever have a few hours to spare and you really want to read your Microsoft end-user license agreement, you will find that Microsoft disclaims all liability, and in no case can you ever claim more than $5 in compensation. That's what it says. So that's a regulatory tool that's been around for thousands of years that the tech industry has managed to avoid. And I think it would be very sensible if we were to restore that tool, which works very well for fast-moving technologies, for things that unfold very quickly, and so on. The only problem with liability is that it's not much use for extinction risk. In fact, that's a mathematical theorem. It doesn't deter people from imposing extinction risks on the rest of us at all, because, of course, if the risk comes to pass, they won't pay. Myth number 2. AI is a general purpose technology, and you can't regulate general purpose technologies. This is a strange axiom, and you might say, well, okay, why? And then they say, oh, but look at electricity. We don't regulate electricity. It's a general purpose technology. And you think, but that's nonsense, right? Electricity as a general technology is highly regulated. The voltage and currents have to be regulated. Otherwise, you would set fire to every city on Earth. The wiring is regulated. All employees who work with electricity are regulated and trained. The plugs, the appliances are regulated. So these myths are trotted out by people who are professionals, who have successfully in the past opposed regulation of cigarettes, of carbon dioxide, you name it. It's the same playbook that's being used here to prevent the regulation of technology. So as I mentioned, effective regulation is about setting the level of risk that we're willing to accept, and then requiring demonstrable proof or a high degree of evidence that the technology meets that level of risk. And this is how, here's some water. Why can I drink this? Why can I drink it? Because it's regulated. I know that I can drink it because the companies are subject to regulation on the quality and safety of this product. Same with food, same with this building. How can I sit in this building without being worried that it's going to collapse on my head? Because it's regulated, because it has to meet building codes before anyone can come into it. Most of you flew here on an airplane or took a train. Those are highly regulated. If you go upstairs in the elevator, that's highly regulated. Nuclear power is often cited as an example of how the risk is quantified very precisely. We accept a risk of nuclear meltdown of between 1 in a million per year and 1 in 10 million per year. And that risk has been set by regulators because that's what we consider to be a reasonable trade-off to get the benefits of nuclear power. It's very difficult if you set the risk to 0 to prove that your nuclear power station will never have an accident. But we have been able to prove, and those proofs take the form of millions of pages of probability calculations that the level of risk for nuclear power meets that standard. So what can we do with AI? I think with planes, for example, the notion of safety is pretty clear. It's not supposed to touch the ground unless you mean to touch the ground, right? That's pretty much it. With AI, because it's so general, it's difficult to say, what is the line between safe and unsafe behaviors by AI. So this approach of what we call behavioral red lines is gaining some currency. And behavioral red lines are specific, obviously unacceptable behaviors by AI systems. And the idea would be that companies need to demonstrate that their systems will not cross those red lines with some reliability that's appropriate for the level of risk that we're talking about. And so if a red line says AI systems should not explain to terrorists how to build a new biological weapon, that's a fairly high risk thing, so you'd want a fairly low probability of that happening. Another red line might be, an AI system should not pretend to be a human being, whether a general human being or a specific human being. That's maybe a bit less of a risk, so maybe you might have a slightly higher threshold for that. Now, when it comes to extinction, which many, or in fact all of the leading CEOs of AI companies have said is a pretty likely outcome of their effort to create AGI, what's an acceptable level of risk? Should it be 0? Well, probably not, because there is already a background level of extinction risk from other things, like asteroid collisions and so on. And so we might say, well, obviously it should be safer than a nuclear power station, right? Because extinction is much worse than a nuclear meltdown. So let's say, for the sake of argument, 1 in 100 million per year. And I think that's a bit generous, but we'll go with that. So what do the companies say the risk is? The CEOs have given numbers for the risk of extinction from the technology that they are trying to build between 10 and 50%. So put another way, we need the technology to be 10 million times safer than it is. Also, those numbers that they're giving out are, I would say, seat of the pants. They're not even back of the envelope, right? They're not based on any actual calculation. It's just a gut feel that they have about how easy it will be to lose control as we make AI systems more and more capable. So we need regulations that will require a demonstration that the probability of loss of control leading to human extinction is less than 1 in 100 million. And that applies even to systems now, right? It should be easy to come up with that evidence now. As the systems get more capable, it's only going to get harder. So the company's view is, well, we don't know how to show any level of risk. But if they can't do it now, how are they going to do it next year and the year after when the systems are, in fact, much more dangerous and much more capable? So this argument that technology companies come up with often is, we don't know how to comply with any required level of risk, and therefore you can't require it. Let me say that again. You, the human race, are not allowed to protect yourselves from the technology that we are building that may well make you go extinct. So that's the argument that they're making. I think I'll stop there. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Professor Stewart. Professor Russell. Now, if I might turn to the panelists. 1C, if I can start with you. There's much that you can react to. The scenarios that I posed, the comments by Professor Russell. I'm thinking, Singapore sits at the intersection of finance, infrastructure, and digital connectivity in Southeast Asia. So if one of the scenarios I mentioned unfolded in the region today, how would coordination actually begin in practice? Which channels would move first? And where do you see the most dangerous friction? Verification, authority, speed? Up to you on what you want to comment on.
Thanks, Alejandro.
And you have only some minutes, no?
Is the time we're speaking regulated?
First of all, thanks for having me here on this panel. I think when we were looking at the notes that you sent us, when I was looking at the notes that you sent us, I don't think I can speak on behalf of my other panelists. I thought it was quite interesting because I don't think we have had this conversation before in terms of thinking about how do we coordinate amongst governments when a crisis happens in AI, right? And I have to say, this is a somewhat theoretical and hypothetical discussion right now because it's not something that we have set up specifically for AI, right? So, but we have done it for other types of crisis, and I define it very specifically on crisis because I think Stuart talked about governance and regulations of AI, and I think here we are perhaps I'm gonna maybe focus on your earlier kind of provocations, which is how do we cooperate when it comes to something that has happened in a crisis, meaning some bad thing has happened and what we can do about it, right? But we have had crises in the past, separate from AI, whether it's the pandemic, in cybersecurity and so on. So there are ways in which governments are working together in concert to deal with crisis. The question is, what has changed in the age of AI, right? And I think we should be able to, what has changed in terms of, perhaps in terms of the scenarios that you've highlighted, doesn't sound like it's, well, I mean, it has changed in terms of the speed, the scale, and our ability to assess the situation. But it is still applied to these scenarios in which we find ourselves in the past: cybersecurity, healthcare, and so on, pandemics. And I think in that case, we should continue to rely on the kind of institutions that we have set up amongst ourselves to address these issues. But maybe what's additional is to your earlier provocation on how do we identify and how do we verify, right? I work with a few other institutions that, some are called AI safety institutions, but some are not anymore. And there are other names as well. And one of the things we do a lot of is joint testing efforts, evaluations, and so on. And it's not so much the outcome of the joint testing efforts as important. I mean, the results and all that for us is less critical. Building a capacity for evaluating is important. But what was really important for us is the ability to start building trust. I think for governments to work together, you have trust with one another at various levels. At the diplomatic level, our foreign ministries, they have channels to engage and discuss. At the sectoral level, the healthcare agencies have a way to engage and discuss. The cybersecurity agencies have a way to engage and discuss. How then do the people working in AI have a way to engage and discuss? And I'd like to suggest that this is one initial way in which we're starting to build that trust among people who are within government dealing with AI, working together on even small projects is a way to start doing that. And doing it on a regular basis, exchanging information, that allows us to build trust. And when you have trust, then you can pick up a phone and call someone and say, my colleague in Japan is Akiko, right? And pick up a phone and call Akiko and say, hey, something has happened. Can we just figure out, is this what you're observing today as well or not? And then coming back then to Stuart's earlier sort of discussions around and how then do we regulate and think about the issues around requirements on labs to demonstrate that they're not putting us at risk, right? And in very severe scenarios, this is also one way in which we can then start to do that together, right? Governments have to, one, build the capacity to also technically evaluate and assess. We can't rely on the labs themselves to show us. So if they give us a number, how do we validate that? And we can't do it on our own because collectively, I think we even have less resources than a single lab in doing some of this work. So definitely we have to do it together, right? So these are ways in which we can try to address what you call in the title, diplomatic crisis, right? I'll just summarize. I know it's a very long kind of intervention, but I'll summarize in 3 points. One, we already have existing ways in which we are dealing with crisis, whether it's in healthcare, in cybersecurity, and so on. We should do that. I think on the AI front, we can start building a lot more trust amongst, I don't want to use allies, amongst colleagues who are working in this space, especially around technical evaluation. And then 3, as we start to build this technical evaluation to not just deal with crisis, but we can then start dealing with issues around governance. And I have more to say on that, but maybe I'll just have my fellow panelists provide some provocations as well. Thanks.
We'll have a second round. So, Yuko-san, if I might, if you could give us the perspective from Japan, but also, if from the global governance standpoint, which you're quite familiar with, if one of the scenarios, again, that I mentioned occurred tomorrow or any other scenario, which institutions would be expected to coordinate? Where do you see the biggest institutional gaps for blind spots, if you will?
Thank you. Thank you for. It's okay.
I think it's okay.
Thank you for having me. And the topics you are already focusing on, diplomatic crisis in AI, is really something not evident, but we have to tackle all together. I agree with this. And I don't think we have solution, international organization, something like that. We should be innovative in the way to tackle these issues. Because first of all, AI is technology. As such, we know that we have to tackle, I would say, we are facing many crises today, more frequently, more in depth, and handling all these issues we have experienced by the past. When you have cross-border crisis, diplomatic way of handling these issues. And this has been, we have an accumulation of past experiences and doing well, and something is works, something else, sometimes it doesn't work. But we have some kind of consolidated way of tackling this issue. But when you have AI, which is amplifier of existing crisis, the difference is that the speed, and we are less equipped human to make decision quickly, and also to have a way to have an overview quickly cross-border issues. So we are less equipped to address all these issues. So how to do that? We are not alone as a human being. And also, I would say the differences with existing crisis and AI-driven or AI-amplified crisis, that usually when we human are tackling this crisis, we have kind of social consensus, but it is absent in case of AI. So the difference is there, and I think its phenomena is becoming more critical because we are observing that AI is gaining in agency more and more. So how to do that? So my view on this issue is that we need to consolidate what we have accumulated by the past, but not only, because we see the limits, because of the capacity of human capacity. So what is needed is to have kind of new practice, new framework to address these cross-border crises partly generated by AI. There's no one solution, but fundamentally what is needed is that more to more human touch within. That means human to human, nation to nation, institution to institution, channels at the basis. And it should be consolidated by mutual trust. And what we needed is not just addressing crisis you have in your front, but everyday life. You need to consolidate all these channels with employing human capacity. And that's the key to foresee innovative way of tackling crises generated by AI. I stop here.
Great. Thank you very much, Yuka-san. Now, if I might turn to Azijan Azimi. Now, I'm sure I mispronounced the name, but Azijan, if you could then talk to us a bit about the Central Asian perspective. What kinds of AI-related crises feel most plausible in your regional context? And how included do countries in the region feel in terms of global coordination discussions? And what would make a crisis coordination mechanism sort of genuinely usable from your point of view, from where you're sitting?
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I'm not sure if it's working, but I can speak loudly enough for everyone to hear.
I think it takes time.
I think it's working now. Perfect. Thank you so much. First of all, I want to say Namaste, India. Thank you so much for hosting all of us. It's been a phenomenal time in Delhi. for everyone who has come over. Let me say a few words in the beginning about kind of what's been interesting in Central Asia that I think could be a model for other regions of the world. Last year, I was involved in a process together with our colleagues from the government of Tajikistan and the governments of Central Asia in drafting a United Nations General Assembly resolution, which was passed over the summer. It was passed on July 25th of last year. And that resolution is quite unique in several aspects. First and foremost, it built a common Central Asian approach to artificial intelligence, where we laid out that eventually our intent with AI adoption is to achieve Sustainable Development Goal implementation. And as part of that, there were two features that were very interesting for our discussion. Number one, the UN resolution called for the establishment of a regional center for AI. So it's the first time when, at a regional level, there's a center for AI in a particular part of a region that will help at least coordinate between the different AI bodies that are responsible for it. Our friends from the Agency for Innovation and Digital Technologies of Tajikistan are here today. The Deputy Director is here, and they're working very hard on realizing this Regional Center for AI initiative now, together with other governments of Central Asia. Number two, the resolution recognized mechanisms of AI self-regulation that have come out of Central Asia. And Tajikistan has been really at the frontier of that discussion. Now, let me be a little bit libertarian here and give you the perspective that we've had, at least in our country. So there was mentioning on this panel from other esteemed speakers about, for example, electricity as a technology, cars, aviation. What is the main cause for plane crashes? About 80% of plane crashes are because of human error. It's because of pilot decisioning that was faulty. What is the main reason for car crashes? Almost all of the time, it's human decisioning, right? It's because of different factors that are tied to the human drivers who are making faulty decisions. You mentioned in your finance case, and I'll tie this point back, the case of how in trading, for example, financial trading, most of the trading at hedge funds is done by AI models. Why is that the case? Why have hedge funds moved away from human decisioning? Because in any backtest that you can run, an AI model that's as basic as a classification model running on a very simple boosting algorithm outperforms human judgment. And the point I'm trying to make is that these technologies, including artificial intelligence technologies, are permeating into decision making, not because of human perfection, but because they perform superior to human imperfection. So when we talk about regulation of AI, the question that puzzles me as someone who is a founder of a startup that is now helping our government with the AI policy, is that we always talk about AI as an object of regulation, right? And that's not really the case, because who's eventually making the decisions? It's actually humans that are using AI as an instrument to make decisions. So why do we hold AI to a standard that is much tougher and stricter than human decision making? I find that to be very puzzling. And the perspective of Tajikistan and Central Asia, at least from our conversations with our peers in the region, is that, think about it from our perspective, right? Tajikistan is a developing economy. We're just permeating our AI policies. We've put AI into 100 schools across the country. There's a national LLM. We've developed locally. We export AI to 20 countries. A lot of this work is done by my good colleagues who are in the room today. And the question we raise is, if we were to step in to regulate AI at this point, right? What does that mean about our competitive advantage on the global scale, where countries are, look at China, for example, countries are developing and deploying AI models at scale never seen in human history before, right? Regulation slows down our ability to innovate fast. But it's not a question of not regulating. Of course, we all agree that AI should be regulated somehow. We all agree on that point. It's a question of, do we hold AI to perfect standards while human decisioning is imperfect? That's where I will push back. And one comment I want to make is, Zippel, the company that I founded, as the founder and CEO, I chair the AI Council under our Ministry of Industry and New Technologies in Tajikistan. We work on using synthetic data in order to automate decisioning for risk models in banks. So whenever we go to a bank, let me explain to you the journey of what we go through as startuppers. We go to a bank, we tell them, folks, don't trust our words. Let's run a back test. We can help you reduce your non-performing loan rate by using our proprietary synthetic data models. You know what the bankers tell us? Fantastic. Let's run a test, but let's make it X condition, Y condition, Z condition. And 6 months pass, we've done 10 back tests, and then they come back and say, let's run one more test of hypothetical scenario of this happening. Like, we go through 7 rings of hell before deploying one AI model into production when we're serving enterprises. And banking is a very highly regulated sector. And if someone tells me that a government bureaucrat can regulate me better than my customer, I'm sorry, but it's just not the case. And we service 60 banks across 20 countries. The world's largest Islamic bank is our customer. We just onboarded them. To onboard them as a customer, we had to go through 12 months of piloting and testing. Right? And my customer is the ultimate judge of how capable is my AI model and whether it was developed in a properly regulated environment. So my call is to think about it a bit broader, where I understand that for the advanced economies, strongly regulated policies make sense. But let's not go back into colonial thinking of the whole world should follow that model. It's not the case. We're living in a different world. And frontier economies like Tajikistan have a voice of their own to make. So this is my call to have a bit of kind of counterintuitive thinking and to at least give a chance to developing countries to showcase that we can have our own independent sovereign policies that are innovation first, and that will help us to have our own seat on the table, not to be on the menu at the table.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I see one C wants to respond a bit to that before we go to Audrey Tang's video, please.
Thanks for that. I mean, I absolutely agree that I think there are many things that we should allow economies to be able to do and be able to use AI effectively in Singapore. We do that as well. I mean, AI is going to be a big part of our economy and our society. We've launched a lot of recent, made a lot of recent announcements to actually be able to use AI effectively. But I thought maybe I wanted to break down the regulation conversation a little bit better, because I think it's a little bit more complex than that, I feel. So I work in AI governance and safety policy. So if we talk about AI regulation in Singapore, so that's really what I will be focusing on, what I'll be working on if we have AI regulations in Singapore. I think we look at regulations in terms of outcomes, not technology. I think that's important, and that actually is reflected in how that comes out in the sectors, in financial services, in healthcare, in legal, in HR, and so on. You focus on the outcomes and not the technology, and those regulations already exist today. But of course, then you start thinking, but in some cases, it might be difficult in the existing regulations to be able to address the new impact that AI might have in these specific use cases. So what do? You either clarify your laws or you introduce new ones. So for example, in elections, we introduced a law relating to deepfakes a couple of years ago. So that it's very specific, it's very surgical. Only during elections, you cannot be using deepfakes. And we have mechanisms to, one, decide if it's a deepfake. And the deepfake doesn't have to come from AI. It can come from Photoshop. It can come from somebody just, putting somebody's voice over a video, right? That doesn't require AI. It just scales it up, makes it easier, and so on. And then we have means to say, then who then tells the platforms? And we're talking about social media platforms, WhatsApp, and so on. Who then tells them to remove this? So you must have a mechanism to do all of that as well. So these are laws that you can put in place to address specific issues that you have to deal with. And I think for your citizens, they will expect some level of protection from harms. Not everything, but some level of protection from harms. And actually, you've already done that too in many ways in your sectors. Now, let's come to AI in a different ways. What Stuart was talking about was how do we deal with significant risks from AI at the broad level across the world, right? And that, I think, requires a form of collaboration and working across governments, right? We're talking about companies with a lot of influence, which is already alluded to by Stuart. Then how then do we work together on that? And that's slightly different from how we want to use AI domestically within our countries, right? But even then, when we think about something like ChatGPT from OpenAI or any of the models that are dealing with our citizens on a very regular daily basis, and you worry about the harms that can come from that, and that is a domestic issue that we have to deal with. What do we care? What do we say as unacceptable harms, whether it's CSAM, non-consensual sexual images, and so on? What is unacceptable? And that's something that we can actually address. We have online safety laws in Singapore, and we can use that to be able to deal with these things. So that's the point I'm trying to make. That regulation is a complex topic. You have different parts of it that you want to address. There are things that we should do internationally together, and that takes time and effort. And maybe diplomacy is an important piece of that.
Thank you very much. I see that all our panelists want to respond, and I'll have you respond. Can you just keep it brief, because I would like to show the video of Dr. Audrey Tang, and we'll make that at the end. So please, Stuart,
okay.
your comment.
Yeah, so with respect to the last remarks from our Tajikistan colleague, regulation is not a single uniform thing, right? It's always needs to be calibrated to the risk that's being posed. And your bank customers, because you are not liable as an AI company for losses incurred by the banks trading with your software, they have a very strong incentive to impose lots of testing, which is effectively regulation but happening in the commercial arena. But when a company like OpenAI is selling it directly to the user is not aware. There's a huge information asymmetry. I may not know that this software is capable of convincing my children to commit suicide. And so what kinds of regulation depend a lot on the information status of the participants, their economic resources, and so on. And regulation does not have to be an enormous burden. My friend Emily runs food standards in the UK, and she says that there's far more regulations on sandwiches than there are on AI systems. So a little sandwich shop can manage to comply with a heavy regulatory burden, and we open across the world more than 1 million new innovative restaurants and sandwich shops every year, right? So somehow regulation and innovation are going hand in hand, and as I mentioned, vast parts of our economy, water, food, buildings, transportation, these are all regulated, and yet they function very well. So I think that's really important to understand. I just want to come back to something that Wansi and Yukio said about cooperation among regulators. I think this is a really crucial thing, and I think cooperating around specific regulatory projects that are not moonshots, right? That are not trying to regulate everything in one giant omnibus global treaty. For example, we should have a right to know, every human being should have a right to know if they're interacting with a human or a machine. It's a very simple proposition. It's already in the European Union AI Act. I would love it if regulators around the world could cooperate to figure out how to put that into their national laws and how to operationalize it, for example, so that social media platforms screen out bots so that you know that the message you're getting is not from a bot but from a real human being. That would be wonderful.
Now, just 1 minute each, please. 1 minute each, because I know the time.
Just 1 minute. Regarding regulation, we have to move from this traditional classical principal agent model, high authority controlling companies, actors, into more co-responsible model, in the way that everyone on the same boat, and including those who are at the government, regulatory issues, but private sectors and users. And we have to take responsibility, each of us, and then changing the way of operating. So just, I finished.
Thank you so much. And John, and then
We'll keep it super short. Yes, I think the reason that there are more regulations on sandwiches than artificial intelligence is because AI is a bit more complex than making sandwiches, so we need to take time on how to actually think through these policies. One question I just want to, rather comment I want to add is that I absolutely agree with my colleague from Singapore, because it's not a question of, we are working on the AI regulation policy in Tajikistan. My colleagues from the government are here as well, and we understand how it needs to be risk-based, but our startups in the country, right, and we're one of the few developing countries that is exporting AI software today at scale in production, are not entering the European Union markets because EU AI Act is too complex. We can debate theoretically what is right, is the risk-based approach framework great or not, but de facto, in the real world of practice, companies are not entering the EU market because we simply don't understand what is in that 1,000-page code that I think even GPT will have a hard time contemplating upon. So the question I want to pose for everyone just to think about is that our approach is AI self-regulation, where exactly as my colleague from Singapore said, it needs to be outcome-based. We have 7 principles that we've enshrined in that resolution that passed. AI has to be explainable. The models have to go through validation, out-of-sample testing, out-of-time testing before they go into deployment. We understand that because we make those models. But it's a question of, should it be up to a government agency to deploy this into practice, or should it be the market to self-regulate up until we understand a little bit better what is AGI, how does it feel like, and whether we should eat sandwiches with it or not? Thank you.
Okay, now, I'm sorry, we're rushing into Dr. Audrey Tagg's video, so please.
Good local time. I'm Audrey Tang, Taiwan's Cyber Ambassador, First Digital Minister, and 2025 Right Livelihood Laureate. My heartfelt thanks to AI Safety Asia for staging this important conversation at the India AI Impact Summit. In diplomacy, we think in years. It takes time to draft texts, to build consensus, and ratify commitments. In the AI world, crises unfold in milliseconds. What I wish to discuss today is this incompatibility between diplomatic and algorithmic time. These crises are not on the horizon, they're unfolding now. Deepfake videos featuring public figures, synthetic voice scams spreading across borders, automated systems amplifying harm before regulators can respond. And we have seen what algorithmic time does to markets. The 2010 flash crash, where US markets plunged and recovered in minutes. We can see what it does to trust. Europol has warned that organized crime is using AI-driven impersonation to scale fraud and evade detection across jurisdictions. And here is the shift that changes everything. AI is no longer just a tool, it is a participant. NIST's most recent guidance described AI agent systems as capable of planning and taking autonomous actions that affect real-world systems, as OpenClaw recently demonstrated. Once incidents become agentic, response cannot depend on heroic improvisation. It requires institutionalized cross-border mechanisms. So what does AI crisis diplomacy look like? 3 building blocks and 1 regional proposal. First, for trust, build a whitelist for public integrity. Taiwan's 111 government SMS is a dedicated shortcode for official messages, so citizens can instantly verify what is real. A blue checkmark for public communication. Every message shows the agency's name and the last 3 digits of your phone number. Proof that sender knows who you are and the network guarantees who they are. When people trust the channel, phishing and impersonation lose steam. Every country needs its own version, a low-friction, verifiable trust channel that works even in crisis. Second, for consensus, use AI to listen at scale and reward bridging, not outrage. Tools like Polis simplify interaction to agree or disagree, removing reply threads that amplify emotions. They surface bridging statements, ideas that people with opposing views still find reasonable, and make them visible. The V-Taiwan process combines this with in-person dialogue, transforming polarized issues into workable policy. Tools like Talk to the City push the scale of listening further with auditability at the core. Every theme traces back to original participant statements so society can verify whether the summary is faithful. In crisis diplomacy, legitimacy comes from speed and verifiability. Third, for safety, treat AI incidents as civil defense. Deepfakes do not stop at borders. Market cascades do not either. Work on defining and monitoring AI incidents is emerging, but we still lack the operational connective tissue for cross-border coordination. So here is my proposal. Establish a regional AI crisis liaison network, a technical hotline for the algorithmic age. Now we do not need to start from scratch. In cybersecurity, first, provides a global network for incident response teams. AP CERT offers a trusted contact framework for the Asia Pacific. What we need is to extend that capacity to cover AI-specific incidents, whether by deepening existing mandates, embedding AI expertise within the structures, or establishing complementary liaison points that plug into the networks we already have. The goal is to ensure that when a millisecond scale crisis hits, cross-border cooperation is not improvised. It is ready to roll. This does not require a political alignment. It requires technical trust. Finally, a window of opportunity. Let Asia be not just a rule taker, but a supplier of safety infrastructure. This summit is the first event of this scale hosted by the Global South, possible through growing recognition of the institutional power of the India digital public infrastructure. Aadhaar and UPI are increasingly seen as leaders